sit in the back or get off my bus." Tyler Bowman's voice cut through the midday chatter like a blade, loud enough to bounce off every overhead fluorescent panel in the transit depot, loud enough for every passenger gripping a pole or scrolling a phone to freeze and turn. He pointed one thick finger at Dr. Elena Marsh, her green blazer pressed, her blue jeans crisp, her white sneakers clean against the scuffed rubber floor mat, and smiled the way men smile when they believe nothing can touch them. 31 years on this route, lady. Nobody tells me how to run my bus." The passengers nearest the front shifted, some nodding, one woman near the window actually clapping, and Dr. Elena Marsh stood there in the full glare of afternoon sun, pouring through the depot's skylight windows, perfectly still, her right hand resting lightly on the strap of her worn laptop bag, where, beneath the outer pocket's zipper, a federal body camera had already been recording for 11 minutes, and where a badge engraved with the words U.S. Department of Transportation Civil Rights Division sat waiting like a sentence he had just written for himself. Welcome to Frost Folktales. This is where we tell the stories of those who were underestimated, dismissed, and targeted, yet chose courage over silence. If these stories move you, subscribe and be part of a community that refuses to let them fade into the background. The Harlow Creek Central Transit Depot at 12:47 on a Tuesday afternoon was the kind of place that made a person feel like part of a system. Not a person exactly, but a unit of movement, a body being processed from one point to another under the indifferent blaze of overhead fluorescent panels that ran the full length of the boarding platforms in long humming rows. The afternoon sun came in through the depot's wide skylight windows in broad, clean columns, cutting across the tops of the Route 7 bus seats and illuminating the particular gray of industrial linoleum, the silver of the handrail bars, the tired shuffle of midday commuters who had learned not to look at each other too directly. Dr. Elena Marsh had boarded 11 minutes ago. She had chosen her seat with precision, third row from the front, window side, close enough to the driver's area to observe without appearing to observe, far enough back not to invite immediate confrontation. She had settled her worn laptop bag on her lap rather than the seat beside her, a detail she chose deliberately. She was dressed like a Tuesday, green blazer over a crisp white blouse, blue jeans with a clean crease, white sneakers, no visible badge, no visible credential. Her natural hair was pulled back simply. She carried a paperback novel she had not opened once in 11 minutes, because in 11 minutes there had already been more than enough to watch. Tyler Bowman had been watching her since she climbed the first step. He was 54 years old, broad-shouldered inside his short-sleeved transit supervisor's uniform. The dark fabric of it stretched across the kind of physical confidence that came not from health, but from decades of occupying space that other people yielded without question. A laminated seniority badge clipped to his collar caught the fluorescent light each time he turned his head. His hair was gray at the temples and cropped close, and his face had the particular set of a man whose authority had never been seriously tested. A face arranged permanently around the assumption that he was the most important person in any room he entered. His hands on the route clipboard were large and certain. His voice, when he used it, was the practiced instrument of a man who had learned long ago that volume plus confidence creates its own permission structure. From the moment Dr. Elena Marsh had chosen her seat near the front, Tyler Bowman's attention had locked onto her like a frequency only he could hear. She had noticed it the way she noticed everything on this assignment, calmly, precisely, storing it without reaction. The first comment had come at minute 3. He had been addressing a passenger 2 rows back, but he had pitched his voice outward, toward the front of the bus, toward her, saying something about seats near the front being reserved for elderly passengers and those with mobility needs. His eyes had not moved to the 3 empty front row seats on the opposite side. They had moved to her. Dr. Elena Marsh had turned a page of her unread book. The second comment came at minute 7. He was moving through the aisle, clipboard in hand, technically checking that the accessible seating indicators were properly posted. But his route through the bus was not the most direct one, and he stopped beside her row for a beat longer than the inspection required. His voice this time was quieter but shaped for the passengers immediately surrounding her, the practiced murmur of a man performing fairness for an audience. Something about making sure everyone was comfortable in their appropriate space. The woman near the window had nodded without looking up from her phone. A man in the row behind had shifted in a way that suggested agreement with something, though Tyler Bowman had not finished a complete sentence. Dr. Elena Marsh had noted the language. She had noted the passengers who responded. She had noted the time on the small watch on her left wrist. 12:44. Her right hand rested on the outer pocket of her laptop bag, where the body camera's small indicator light blinked once every 90 seconds in a pattern invisible unless you were looking for it directly. She was not looking for it. She did not need to. By minute 9, Tyler Bowman had stopped pretending the inspection had anything to do with the clipboard. He stood at the front of the bus now, one hand on the metal support pole, and he addressed the general population of the Route 7 passengers with the casual authority of a man who believed he was hosting rather than supervising. He talked about Route 7 running ahead of schedule, about a stop change at Meridian and 5th, and then, without pausing for breath, about how he had been running this route for 3 decades and he knew how to keep things orderly. The word orderly landed with a particular weight. A few passengers nodded. Someone laughed softly at something in his tone. The woman near the window had looked up from her phone and was watching him with the attentive pleasure of someone at a performance they were enjoying. Dr. Elena Marsh turned another page. The fluorescent panels above hummed their steady, impersonal note. The afternoon sun through the skylight glass painted a stripe of clean white light across the floor of the aisle. Outside the depot's wide windows, Harlow Creek moved through its ordinary Tuesday in the ordinary way of cities that believe their systems are working fine. At minute 11, Tyler Bowman pointed his finger at Dr. Elena Marsh and delivered the line, "Sit in the back or get off my bus." The sound of it bounced off every surface the bus offered. The fluorescent panels, the curved ceiling, the windows vibrating faintly with the depot's ambient diesel hum. It was not a remark. It was not a suggestion framed as a reminder. It was a performance, calculated and fully committed, the voice of a man who had done this before and found it effective and found it safe and found, somewhere in the years of doing it, that he enjoyed it. The passengers near the front went still in the particular way that crowds go still when something crosses from uncomfortable to undeniable. The woman near the window clapped once, twice, the sound of it small and sharp and certain. In the row behind Dr. Elena Marsh, a young man in a green hoodie and dark jeans had gone very still. His name was Damon Eccles, though Dr. Elena Marsh did not know it yet. His hands were in his lap, and then they were not. One of them moved slowly, carefully, toward the outer pocket of his own jacket, where his phone was. He moved the way people move when they are aware that being noticed, doing what they are doing, could make things considerably worse. Tyler Bowman was grinning. It was not a private grin. It was the grin of a man performing for a room and feeling the room perform back at him. The feedback loop of unchecked authority, finding its audience and reading their silence and their nods and that one small clap as the permission to go further. 31 years. He had the weight of 31 years in that grin. He had the laminated badge and the seniority number and the name that appeared in transit authority communications as long-tenured and valued. And he had all of that arranged behind his smile like a wall he had never once seen cracked. Dr. Elena Marsh looked at him, not at her book, not at the window, not at the stripe of afternoon light on the floor. She looked at him directly, with the full, clear, unhurried attention of a woman who had been trained for exactly this, trained to observe without reacting, to record without revealing, to hold the complete architecture of what was happening in the professional part of her mind while the human part of her did what the human part always did in moments like this, which was to feel the precise and specific weight of being told, in front of other people, where she was and was not permitted to sit. She noted the language he had used, sit in the back, the specificity of the direction. She noted the time, 12:47. She noted the woman who had clapped, the passengers who had nodded, the young man behind her whose hand had reached for his phone. She noted the particular quality of Tyler Bowman's grin, the completeness of his certainty, the absolute absence in his face of any awareness that this moment was anything other than one more Tuesday he controlled. She did not reach for her badge, not yet. There was a reason she had not reached for it in 11 minutes, and a reason she would not reach for it now. And the reason was the same as it had always been. The badge was not the weapon. The evidence was the weapon, and the evidence was already assembled, already running, already time-stamped and stored in a federal-grade recording device, clipped inside the outer pocket of a laptop bag, resting on the lap of a woman Tyler Bowman had just made the central exhibit in his own federal civil rights case. Outside the Harlow Creek Central Transit Depot, in the pool of afternoon sun spreading across the parking apron, a gray sedan sat idling at the far edge of the lot. Inside it, a man in a green jacket over a white-collared shirt sat behind the wheel with headphones on and a small monitor propped on the dashboard. His name was Calvin Osei, and on the monitor in front of him, the body camera feed was running clear and sharp and uninterrupted. Tyler Bowman's face filling the frame, his finger extended, his mouth forming the words that were already being encoded into a federal record that would outlast every assumption of invulnerability Tyler Bowman had ever carried onto this bus. Calvin Osei's jaw was tight. His hands rested on the steering wheel, very still. He watched the monitor. He did not look away. The morning came in clean through the hotel window, wide and unobstructed, the kind of natural light that makes everything look slightly more honest than it did the night before. Dr. Elena Marsh had been awake since 5:43, not because sleep had failed her, but because there was work to do, and the work had a gravity that pulled her forward before the alarm could. She sat at the small table beside the window in a deep green blouse and dark navy slacks, her laptop open, her reading glasses on, a federal case folder spread to her left and a legal pad to her right. The room was mid-range and adequate. Clean surfaces, white walls, overhead lights she had switched off in favor of the window. She did not need fluorescent brightness right now. She needed clarity. The folder on the table held 11 complaints. Not Tyler Bowman's name specifically. Not one document that said in plain language, this man did this thing on this bus, and someone wrote it down. The folder held something more diffuse and therefore more damning. 22 months of formal complaints submitted to the Department of Transportation Civil Rights Division by Black and Latino passengers of the Harlow Creek Municipal Transit Authority, complaints that had been logged, assigned case numbers, acknowledged with form letters, and then allowed to accumulate in a digital filing system without resolution. 11 voices that had gone through the correct channels, 11 people who had believed in the process enough to fill out the forms, submit the documentation, wait for a response. Dr. Elena Marsh opened the first file. Complaint number 1, filed 19 months ago by a 67-year-old woman named Bernice Holloway, resident of Eastside, Harlow Creek. The language of the complaint was careful and polite, in the way that people who have been taught to be careful and polite write when they want to be taken seriously. Ms. Mez Holloway described being told by a transit supervisor, male, approximately 50 years of age, described in the complaint as wearing a laminated seniority badge, that the front section of bus Route 7 was designated for through passengers and that she would need to move toward the rear. She described asking what a through passenger was. She described the supervisor's response as dismissive. She described the other passengers who watched this happen and said nothing. The complaint had been acknowledged 14 days after filing. There was no record of further action. Dr. Elena Marsh read it twice. Then she turned to the next file. Complaint number 4. A 22-year-old college student, name withheld in the summary, initials DE, reported being denied boarding on bus route 7 on 3 separate occasions within a single week. Each denial occurred when the same supervisor was present. The student described being told the bus was at capacity on a Wednesday afternoon when photographs taken by another passenger, photographs the student had attached to the complaint, showed available seating. The complaint had been flagged as requiring follow-up. The follow-up had never been documented. Complaint number 7. A mother named in the complaint as Alicia Renard, traveling with an infant in a stroller, reported that the accessible boarding ramp on bus route 7 was described by the supervising officer as non-operational on 4 separate dates. A maintenance log obtained through a public records request attached to the complaint by Ms. Renard herself, who had clearly done her own research, confirmed that the ramp had not been flagged as non-operational on any of those dates. The complaint had been forwarded to the Transit Authority's Internal Compliance Office. The Transit Authority had responded that the matter had been reviewed and determined to fall within operational discretion. Operational discretion. Dr. Elena Marsh paused on those 2 words for a moment longer than the others. She understood bureaucratic language. She had been reading and writing it for 11 years, but there were phrases that functioned as erasure, dressed in professional clothing, and operational discretion was one of them. It meant, we reviewed what our employee did and decided it was acceptable. It meant, the complaint has been processed and the process is now complete. It meant, the person who wrote this letter will receive no further communication unless they escalate through channels that are, by design, exhausting and inaccessible. She wrote something on her legal pad, underlined it twice. By the time she had worked through all 11 files, the morning light had shifted from pale gold to a stronger, more direct white. She removed her reading glasses and set them on the table beside the folder. 11 complaints, 19 months, 1 transit supervisor, whose description appeared in 9 of the 11. 9 of 11, and yet the Transit Authority's internal records contained no formal disciplinary notation, no escalation, no documented investigation of the pattern. The complaints had not been ignored through carelessness. They had been managed, carefully, procedurally, in a way that generated the appearance of response without the substance of accountability. And then there was complaint number 12, yesterday's incident. Dr. Elena Marsh's body camera had recorded 11 minutes and 40 seconds of footage, of which 6 minutes and 22 seconds contained direct, documented interaction between herself and Tyler Bowman, including the precise moment he pointed at her and told her to sit in the back or get off his bus. Those words existed now in the evidentiary record, not as a complaint, not as one person's account of what she believed she heard, but as audio and video documentation of exactly what was said, exactly how it was said, and exactly who said it. Complaint number 12 was not like the other 11. It was the other 11 made irrefutable. It was the pattern with a face and a voice and a timestamp. A knock came at the hotel room door. At 9:47, Calvin Osei came in carrying 2 coffees and a secured tablet, his green jacket over a white-collared shirt and dark slacks, his expression the particular combination of serious and composed that Dr. Elena Marsh had come to recognize as his working mode. He set a coffee in front of her and took the chair across the table without ceremony. They had been working together for 2 years. They did not waste time on preamble when there was evidence to discuss. Calvin set the secured tablet on the table between them and turned it so she could see the screen. The body camera footage had been reviewed, time-stamped, and logged overnight by the DOT's digital forensics team in Washington. The chain of custody was clean. Every second of the recording was admissible. The metadata confirmed the device had not been altered or edited. Calvin scrolled through the time-stamped log with a methodical finger and did not say anything until Dr. Elena Marsh nodded. "Good," she said. He picked up his coffee. Then he said what they were both already thinking. Bowman's behavior on the bus is documented and clean, but it only means what it needs to mean if we can connect it to the pattern. Isolated incident of one supervisor on one bad day. The transit authority's attorneys argue training failure, individual misconduct, unfortunate but not systemic. They issue an apology, mandatory retraining, maybe a formal reprimand. Case gets resolved administratively, and the structural problem stays exactly where it is. Dr. Elena Marsh tapped the edge of the federal folder. That is what these are for. Calvin looked at the folder. 11 complaints. 12 now, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he asked the question she had been sitting with since 5:43 that morning. Do we have enough to make the systemic argument? Not just the pattern of complaints, but documented evidence that the pattern was known to the authority and not acted upon. Not yet, Dr. Elena Marsh said. But we know where to look. She opened the folder to complaint number 7. Alicia Renard, the accessible ramp, the maintenance logs, and slid it toward Calvin. He read it without picking it up, his eyes moving with the practiced speed of someone who reads federal documents the way other people read news headlines. The authority's internal compliance office received this, she said, reviewed it, closed it with a one-line response. That means there is a paper trail inside the transit authority that documents exactly what they knew and when they chose to stop caring. We need those internal records. Calvin sat back. That is a formal document request. It signals to the authority that we are beyond the preliminary phase. She nodded, which means we move on the interviews first, before they know the scope of what we have. I want to talk to the people who filed these complaints before the transit authority has any reason to contact them first. They spent another hour working through the logistics. Dr. Elena Marsh's incognito status as an ordinary commuter had protected the integrity of the body camera documentation. If Tyler Bowman had known he was being observed by a federal investigator, his behavior might have been different, and the defense would have an argument about the naturalistic validity of the footage. That cover was still partially intact. She had not identified herself. She was still, as far as anyone at Harlow Creek Transit knew, an unremarkable Tuesday passenger who had gotten off the bus and disappeared. This was both an advantage and a clock ticking. It would not last indefinitely. Calvin left at 11:15. Dr. Elena Marsh sat with her legal pad for a while after the door closed, working through the architecture of the case as it currently existed and the architecture of the case as it needed to exist before she could recommend formal findings to Washington. The distance between those two structures was considerable, but the foundation was solid in a way that none of the previous 11 complaints had been, because this time the evidence had been built from the beginning to survive scrutiny, and the investigator collecting it had been in the room. At 11:40, she opened her laptop and navigated to the public directory for Harlow Creek State University. The young man in the green hoodie from the bus. She had seen his face when Tyler Bowman pointed at him and told him to put his phone away. She had seen the expression of someone calculating the cost of resistance in real time. She had seen him make the calculation and quietly put the phone in his pocket. But not before he had already pressed record. She found a name in the directory that matched what she had. She found a phone number. She dialed. It rang 4 times. Then a young man's voice, careful and slightly guarded, the voice of someone who does not recognize the number and has learned to be cautious about that. "Hello?" Dr. Elena Marsh kept her voice even and professional and warm in equal measure. She introduced herself as a federal transportation researcher conducting a study on passenger experience in mid-sized transit systems. She said she was hoping to speak with a few individuals who rode Harlow Creek Transit regularly. She said it would not take long, and that his participation would be entirely voluntary, and that nothing he shared would be attributed to him by name in any public document without his explicit consent. There was a pause, a long one, the kind of pause that contains an entire internal conversation. Then the young man said, yeah, okay, I'll talk. Dr. Elena Marsh picked up her pen and opened to a fresh page in her field notebook. The morning light came through the hotel window in a strong, clear column across the white paper. She wrote the date at the top of the page. She wrote his name below it. And then she began to write. The Eastside Community Recreation Center sat at the corner of Maple and Dunmore, a low brick building whose wide skylight panels ran the full length of the main hall ceiling, flooding the interior with the kind of clean, honest morning light that made everything look exactly as it was. Overhead fluorescent panels supplemented the natural skylight above, the combined effect leaving no shadows anywhere in the room. Folding chairs had been arranged in a loose semicircle near the center of the hall, and a folding table held a coffee urn, paper cups, and a box of store-bought pastries that nobody had touched yet. Dr. Elena Marsh arrived first, a green blazer over a white-collared shirt, dark slacks, a worn laptop bag over one shoulder. She set her notepad on the chair to her left, uncapped her pen, and waited. This was the third morning of her field interview sequence, and she had learned, over years of this work, that the waiting was as important as anything else. People needed to see you sitting still before they would believe you were truly there to listen. They arrived in ones and twos over the following 20 minutes. An older man who had filed a complaint in June of the previous year and who now seemed uncertain why he had come. A young mother with a sleeping infant buckled against her chest. Two middle-aged men who sat together and said little. And then Bernice Holloway, 67 years old, in a blue jacket over a floral blouse, who walked into the room with the deliberate pace of a woman who had stopped hurrying for other people some years ago. She selected a chair directly across from Dr. Elena Marsh, sat down, placed her hands folded in her lap, and looked at the investigator with eyes that had seen too many versions of this kind of gathering to be surprised by any of its arrangements. Dr. Elena Marsh conducted the group session with careful, open-ended questions, framing everything under her Federal Transportation Accessibility Study cover, which was, she reminded herself, not technically a lie. She was studying accessibility. She was studying the precise mechanisms by which access was withheld. The older man described a ramp that was never operational when he needed it. The young mother described being told the bus was full when she could see with her own eyes that it was not. The two men in the corner described route changes that seemed to occur selectively, in ways that made their commutes longer without any posted notice or explanation. Dr. Elena Marsh wrote everything down. She asked follow-up questions. She thanked each person and meant it. But it was Bernice Holloway who held the room. She waited until the others had spoken. She waited in the way that suggested she had learned patience not as a virtue, but as a survival strategy, one refined over decades of being made to wait. When Dr. Elena Marsh turned to her and asked what her experience on Harlow Creek Transit had been like over the past few years, Bernice Holloway unfolded her hands, looked briefly at a point in the middle distance, and then looked back at Dr. Elena Marsh directly. She said that she had been riding the Route 7 bus for 19 years. She said that for the first 14 of those years, it had been a bus like any other. Not perfect, but ordinary in the way that ordinary things are a gift you don't know you have until someone takes them from you. She said that things changed when Tyler Bowman became the senior supervisor on that route. She described the way his voice shifted when he spoke to her. A flattening, a curtness, a register that communicated before he had even finished a sentence that she was a burden to be managed rather than a passenger to be served. She described the morning he had told her the front seats were reserved for through passengers, even though she had ridden that bus long enough to know that no such designation existed in any official policy. She described the way she had moved to the back without argument, not because she believed he was right, but because she had calculated, correctly, that arguing would cost her more than compliance would. And then she said the thing that Dr. Elena Marsh would carry with her for the rest of the investigation. She said that she had started leaving her house 40 minutes earlier than necessary on mornings when she needed to catch the first Route 7, so that if Tyler Bowman was driving it, she could let it pass and wait for the next one. She said she had been doing this for 2 years, 40 minutes every time. Not because the second bus was better, but because the cost of the confrontation, the particular cost, the one that was never reimbursable, the one that sat in your chest for the rest of the day, was not worth paying before 7 in the morning. The room was very quiet. The fluorescent panels hummed faintly above. The morning light, through the skylights, fell evenly across everything. Dr. Elena Marsh did not interrupt. She did not offer the kind of sympathetic sounds that people sometimes make to signal their own discomfort, which is a different thing entirely from listening. She wrote steadily in her notepad, and while her hand moved across the page, her interior experience was something she would not have been able to put into the clinical language of a federal complaint. It was the feeling of watching a person describe the slow, unremarkable theft of something that should have been permanently and inviolably theirs. The ease of moving through the world, the simple right to sit where she chose, on a bus she had been riding for 19 years, and hearing that person describe the theft with the calm of someone who had long since stopped expecting it back. Bernice Holloway was not angry. She was beyond anger, which is not peace, but is something that looks like it from the outside and is nothing like it from the inside. Dr. Elena Marsh recognized it. She had documented it before, in other cities, in other rooms, with fluorescent lighting and folding chairs. It never stopped being hard to sit across from. The group session wound down by late morning. Dr. Elena Marsh thanked each person individually and scheduled follow-up calls with those willing to provide signed statements. She was gathering her notepad when she noticed Carmen Reyes standing near the door. Carmen Reyes was a Harlow Creek transit bus driver, in her mid-30s, in an orange uniform top and black pants, her Transit Authority ID badge clipped to her collar. She had come in during the last 20 minutes of the group session, stood at the back of the room, and said nothing. Now she was watching Dr. Elena Marsh with an expression that was not quite decision and not quite fear, but somewhere between the two, where a person stands when they have already made up their mind but have not yet finished preparing themselves for what that decision will cost. Dr. Elena Marsh waited. Carmen Reyes crossed the room and asked in a low voice if they could speak privately. Dr. Elena Marsh gestured to the table in the far corner, away from the remaining cluster of people near the coffee urn. They sat. Carmen Reyes glanced at the door twice before she began talking. She spoke quickly, and with the compressed precision of someone who had been rehearsing this in her head for longer than she was willing to admit. She described an internal culture at Harlow Creek Transit in which drivers who filed or supported passenger complaints found themselves quietly reassigned to the least desirable routes, early morning routes, split shifts, routes through areas with the highest incident rates. No formal discipline, no written explanation, just a schedule change that materialized a week or two after a complaint was filed, that everyone understood and no one acknowledged. She described the specific relationship between Tyler Bowman and Transit Director Raymond Holt, a relationship of long standing that functioned as a kind of institutional immunity. Complaints against Tyler Bowman that reached the supervisory level were acknowledged and then filed without action, and the people who filed them knew it and eventually stopped filing. She described a 2021 internal report commissioned by the Transit Authority's own compliance office that documented a statistically significant pattern of complaints against Tyler Bowman from Black and Latino passengers over a period of 3 years. She said the report was received, reviewed, and filed without any formal response or corrective action. She said she knew this because she had seen the memo that accompanied the filing. Then she reached into the front pocket of her uniform and took out a plain white envelope, slightly worn at one corner as though it had been carried for some time. She set it on the table in front of Dr. Elena Marsh and slid it across without ceremony, with the flat, deliberate motion of someone placing a key in a lock they have decided to turn. Inside were 3 internal memos. Dr. Elena Marsh did not open the envelope there. She set her hand over it and looked at Carmen Reyes and told her she understood what she had done and that it would be handled with care. Carmen Reyes nodded once, glanced at the door a final time, stood, and walked out. Dr. Elena Marsh sat alone at the table for a moment. The fluorescent panels above continued their steady, indifferent illumination. Through the skylights, the sun had moved to its afternoon angle, the light longer and more golden now, cutting clean diagonals across the hall floor. She put the envelope in the outer pocket of her laptop bag, closed the clasp, and walked out into the parking lot. The sky above Harlow Creek was wide and entirely clear in that late afternoon way that makes a city look temporary beneath it. Dr. Elena Marsh walked to her car at a measured pace, the laptop bag over her shoulder, her face composed in the way it was always composed in the field, readable as calm, unreadable as anything else. She unlocked the car, set the bag on the passenger seat, and sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel without starting the engine. What Carmen Reyes had handed her was not additional evidence of Tyler Bowman's behavior on Bus Route 7. The body camera had that. What Carmen Reyes had handed her was documentation that the people responsible for correcting that behavior had known about it, possessed formal evidence of it, and chosen, deliberately and on paper, to do nothing. That was a different legal category entirely. That was not misconduct shielded by institutional indifference. That was institutional indifference functioning as an active instrument of misconduct. The distinction mattered enormously in federal civil rights law, and Dr. Elena Marsh understood exactly what it meant for the architecture of the case she was building. She started the car and pulled out of the parking lot into the late afternoon light, and in her mind she was already dismantling the case she had arrived in Harlow Creek to make, and building the larger, heavier, more precise one that Carmen Reyes had just made possible. The Harlow Creek Municipal Transit Authority's administrative headquarters sat 4 blocks from the Central Depot, a glass and steel structure that announced its own importance with the particular confidence of a building designed to impress the people who already worked inside it. Dr. Elena Marsh arrived at 9:58 in the morning, 2 minutes before her scheduled appointment, carrying her laptop bag over one shoulder and a federal compliance audit binder under her arm. The lobby was flooded with natural light from floor-to-ceiling windows that faced the street, supplemented by overhead fluorescent panels running in clean parallel rows across the entire length of the ceiling. Every surface was bright, every face was visible. Dr. Elena Marsh noted this with quiet professional satisfaction as she approached the reception desk and gave her name, not her full title, not her agency division, simply her name and the word federal and the phrase routine audit, and waited while the receptionist made a brief phone call and directed her to the 3rd floor. She wore a pressed white blouse under a deep green blazer, dark slacks, and low-heeled black shoes. Her laptop bag, worn and deliberately unremarkable, was positioned as it always was, outer pocket facing forward, the body camera inside that pocket angled upward through a small internal aperture she had modified herself 3 years ago. The camera had been running since she stepped out of her rental car in the parking structure across the street. It would run until she returned to that car. The conference room on the 3rd floor had a long table of pale wood, 8 chairs, a wall of windows overlooking a landscaped courtyard, and overhead fluorescent panels that ran the full length of the ceiling, just as they did in the lobby below. The light was extraordinary, clean, total, unambiguous. Raymond Holt was already seated when she entered, and he rose with the practiced ease of a man who had spent 30 years making entrances and exits feel like hospitality. Raymond Holt was mid-50s, silver-haired, broad across the shoulders, wearing a navy blue jacket over a pressed orange dress shirt, the kind of outfit that communicated authority without aggression, comfort without carelessness. He had the handshake of a man who had run for something once and decided he preferred the administrative power to the electoral kind. Patricia Wren sat to his left, a red blazer over charcoal slacks, a legal pad in front of her, pen already uncapped. She looked up when Dr. Elena Marsh entered, and her eyes did a thing that attorneys' eyes sometimes did. A rapid, involuntary calibration, scanning for context, finding less than expected, recalibrating upward. Dr. Elena Marsh filed this away and sat down. "Dr. Marsh," Raymond Holt began, settling back into his chair with an air of measured welcome. "We appreciate you coming in directly. Harlow Creek Transit takes its federal compliance obligations with the utmost seriousness, and we want to make sure you have everything you need to complete your review efficiently." Dr. Elena Marsh opened her binder to the first tabbed section and uncapped her pen. "I appreciate that, Director Holt. I'd like to start with ridership data from the past 24 months on routes 7, 12, and 14, and then move on to your internal complaint documentation and resolution protocols." Raymond Holt nodded expansively. "Absolutely. All of that is prepared." He gestured toward Patricia Wren, who slid a USB drive across the table with the smooth efficiency of someone who had rehearsed this moment. "We've compiled everything into a single file: ridership numbers, complaint logs, resolution timelines, full transparency." Dr. Elena Marsh took the USB drive and placed it beside her binder without looking at it. "Thank you. I'd also like to discuss your protocols for employee conduct review when a complaint specifically names a transit employee." Raymond Holt's expression remained cooperative. "Of course, we have a formal process: HR review, documented response, supervisory oversight. I can have our HR director join us for that portion if that would be useful." "That won't be necessary today," Dr. Elena Marsh said pleasantly. She wrote something in her notebook, and the scratching of her pen was the only sound in the room for a moment. "I understand you have a route supervisor on Route 7 named Tyler Bowman." A brief pause. Raymond Holt's expression did not change in any dramatic way. It was more like a door being quietly pulled shut behind his eyes, the smile remaining on the surface, while something more careful positioned itself below it. "Tyler is one of our most senior supervisors, 31 years with the authority. He's been recognized multiple times for his service, Employee of the Year in 2019. He said this last sentence the way people say the weather is mild, casually, informatively, as if the fact itself settled something. "Noted," Dr. Elena Marsh said, and wrote that down too. Patricia Wren had not spoken yet. She was watching Dr. Elena Marsh the way a very good chess player watches an opponent's hand move toward a piece, not at the hand, but at the board. The meeting proceeded for 55 minutes. Raymond Holt offered ridership statistics with a generosity that Dr. Elena Marsh recognized immediately as a calculated form of deflection. Produce the data that doesn't matter, in quantity, with enthusiasm, and the gaps in what you haven't produced become harder to identify. He discussed the transit authority's community outreach programs, their accessibility upgrades, their driver training modules, their partnership with the city's diversity office. He was fluent and convincing and almost certainly had spent a significant portion of the previous 48 hours being briefed on exactly how fluent and convincing to be. He mentioned the 11 complaints exactly once briefly, framing them as a regrettable but statistically minor cluster that the authority was actively reviewing through its standard resolution process. He did not mention that 6 of those complaints named the same route supervisor. Dr. Elena Marsh asked careful questions that revealed nothing. She asked about training certification timelines. She asked about the authority's process for documenting complaint resolutions. She asked about the chain of supervisory oversight on individual routes. She wrote everything down with the methodical patience of someone who already knew the answers and was only waiting to see which ones they would choose to lie about. 47 minutes into the meeting, Patricia Wren excused herself briefly, gathering her phone from the table with the explanation that she needed to take a call from the authority's insurance carrier. Dr. Elena Marsh watched her leave, noted the time in her notebook, and turned her attention back to Raymond Holt. Raymond Holt looked at the closed conference room door for a half-second after it shut. Then he leaned forward in his chair just slightly, and when he spoke again, his voice had dropped a register. The expansiveness was gone, replaced by something more intimate and more revealing. Dr. Marsh, I want to be candid with you, one professional to another. He paused as if weighing his words, though Dr. Elena Marsh could see clearly that he had been weighing them for some time and had simply been waiting for Patricia Wren to leave the room. I think we both understand that federal review processes can go in a lot of different directions. The authority has a real interest in resolving this matter in a way that serves everyone's interests. The passengers, the agency, the city. He spread his hands on the table, palms upward, a gesture of openness that had been practiced into near-perfect naturalness. What I'm proposing is straightforward. Administrative settlement, mandatory sensitivity training authority-wide, documented and certified, a formal written apology from the transit authority issued to any passenger who filed a complaint, and a commitment to an enhanced internal review process going forward. He let that settle for a moment. If the federal review can be concluded without escalation, without this becoming something larger than it needs to be, I think everyone walks away with something valuable. The room was quiet. Outside the windows, the courtyard sat in full afternoon sun, the light clean and direct and steady. Dr. Elena Marsh looked at Raymond Holt for precisely 3 seconds without speaking. She was aware of the body camera in her laptop bag. She was aware of the quality of the light in the room. She was aware that Raymond Holt had just used the words concluded without escalation on a recording that would be reviewed in full by the DOT Civil Rights Division, the Office of Inspector General, and eventually Judge Lorraine Vance. She was aware that what he had just offered her was not efficiency or cooperation. What he had just offered her was the shape of an obstruction. She did not allow any of this awareness to reach her face. "Director Holt," she said, and her voice was warm and perfectly level. "I appreciate your candor, and I want you to know I take seriously everything you've laid out today." She closed her notebook. She capped her pen. She picked up the USB drive and slid it into the outer pocket of her laptop bag, 2 inches from the body camera. These processes do have multiple possible paths forward, and I'll be reviewing all of the documentation you've provided alongside the other materials in the audit file. She reached across the table and shook his hand. His grip was firm. She matched it exactly. "I'll be in touch within the week." Patricia Wren returned to the conference room 2 minutes later to find Dr. Elena Marsh already zipping her laptop bag, and Raymond Holt wearing the cautiously satisfied expression of a man who believed something had just been handled. Dr. Elena Marsh thanked them both for their time, declined the offer of a building escort, and found her own way back to the elevator. The lobby was still brilliantly lit when she emerged from the elevator, the overhead fluorescent panels and the floor-to-ceiling windows working together to produce the kind of clarity that leaves nowhere to hide. She moved toward the exit at the unhurried pace of someone who had gotten what she came for. Along the lobby's east wall, between the elevator bank and the main entrance, ran a display case, route maps, service milestones, laminated photographs of Transit Authority Award recipients arranged in 2 neat rows. She slowed as she passed it, not because she needed to, but because the thing she was looking for was exactly where she expected it to be. Employee of the Year, 2019. Tyler Bowman's photograph. A broad-shouldered man in a transit supervisor's short-sleeved uniform, holding a plaque, grinning at the camera with the unguarded ease of someone who has never imagined standing in front of a different kind of camera entirely. Dr. Elena Marsh looked at it for exactly 4 seconds. Then she pushed through the glass doors and walked out into the bright afternoon sun. The morning sun came through the diner window at a low, direct angle, laying a clean rectangle of light across the table where Dr. Elena Marsh sat with her phone in one hand and a fork she had stopped using in the other. The breakfast in front of her was half-eaten: eggs, toast, a small glass of orange juice with the ice already melted, and the diner around her was filling with the particular noise of a Tuesday morning in a mid-sized city: the scrape of chairs, the rhythm of a coffee machine, a cook calling an order number through the service window. Dr. Elena Marsh heard none of it. Her eyes were on the screen, moving through the article a second time with the careful, unhurried attention of someone who reads not just for content, but for architecture. The piece had been published by the Harlow Creek Courier at 6:47 that morning. It was 4 paragraphs long. The headline read, "Federal Compliance Review Underway at Harlow Creek Transit. Sources say findings expected to be routine." The byline belonged to a staff reporter named Gerald Finch. The language was careful in the way that language is careful when it has been carefully fed to someone. Phrases like ongoing standard review and no indication of systemic violations and sources close to the authority described the process with the specific vocabulary of minimization, the kind of framing that does not lie outright but constructs a container around the truth that makes the truth appear smaller than it is. Dr. Elena Marsh set the fork down. She set the phone face up on the table beside her plate. She looked out the window at the street, at the morning moving through Harlow Creek in its ordinary way, and she was very still. This was not panic. Dr. Elena Marsh did not experience what happened in her chest in that moment as panic. It was something more precise than that: the particular alertness of a person who has been working a complex case in careful conditions and has just watched one of those conditions change. The leak was not accidental. She knew this with the same certainty she knew her own name, because Gerald Finch did not write about federal transportation audits on his own initiative, and because the phrasing of the article, "no indication of systemic violations," was not the language of a general source. It was the language of someone who knew what findings of systemic violation would mean and had made a calculated decision to put a different story into the public record before that finding could arrive. She picked up her phone and called Calvin Osei. He answered before the second ring. "I saw it," he said. No greeting, no preamble. Calvin Osei, who had spent the better part of a week parked in a gray sedan, watching a body camera feed with his hands very still on a steering wheel, understood immediately what the article represented. "It went up this morning. I pulled the reporter's recent coverage. He's done 2 transit authority puff pieces in the last 18 months. Someone fed him this. Patricia Wren, or someone at her direction," Dr. Elena Marsh said. Her voice was level and quiet, the kind of quiet that carries more weight than volume. "Raymond Holt made his offer 4 days ago and got a pleasant thank you and a closed notebook. He's been running calculations since then. He knows I didn't bite, and now he's decided he needs to shape the narrative before I finish the report." Calvin Osei was quiet for a moment. Through the phone she could hear him thinking, which was a sound she had learned to recognize over 2 years of working alongside him. "If the story is already framed as routine," he said, "and then the DOT issues a serious finding, the transit authority's attorneys will spend the next 6 months arguing that the investigation was politically motivated and that DOT overreached." "Yes," Dr. Elena Marsh said. "That's exactly what this is designed to do." She paused. "I'm calling Quan." There was a brief silence, and then Calvin Osei said, "Good," in the tone of a person who had been thinking the same thing and was relieved to hear it said aloud. Agent James Quan was assigned to the DOT Office of Inspector General's Civil Rights Enforcement Division, and his involvement in a compliance audit was not a routine step. Requesting his participation formally through secured communication was the investigative equivalent of changing gears on a steep incline, a deliberate escalation that transformed the case's legal classification From compliance review to potential federal obstruction investigation, Dr. Elena Marsh made the request from her hotel room. An hour later, seated at the desk with her secured federal laptop open, the morning sun still strong through the window behind her, her field notebook open to a fresh page beside the keyboard. She wrote the request with precision, citing Raymond Holt's recorded settlement offer, the timing of the press article relative to the meeting, and the specific statutory language of 18 U.S.C. 1505, which covers obstruction of federal proceedings. She reviewed it once, attached the relevant documentation from her case file, and transmitted it through the DOT's encrypted communications portal. The confirmation came back within 90 minutes. Agent Kwan would arrive in Harlow Creek by early afternoon. He came through the hotel corridor at 2:15, filling the doorway with the kind of physical presence that made a room recalibrate itself. James Kwan was broad-shouldered and deliberate in his movements, a muscular build contained in a green jacket and dark tactical pants, a federal credentials case clipped to his belt. He shook hands with Dr. Elena Marsh and with Calvin Osei, set his bag down, and looked at the evidence laid out across the hotel room's table with the focused attention of a person who has walked into many rooms like this one and knows immediately how to orient himself within them. The table held the full architecture of the case. The body camera footage had been reviewed overnight and clipped into time-stamped segments on a secured laptop, each one labeled with the relevant section of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. Carmen Reyes's 3 internal memos were arranged beside the original 11 complaints, cross-referenced with a handwritten index Dr. Elena Marsh had prepared at 5 that morning. Raymond Holt's recorded settlement offer, captured cleanly on the body camera during their meeting at Transit Authority headquarters, had been transcribed and time-stamped, the relevant language underlined in Dr. Elena Marsh's precise, narrow handwriting. Damon Eccles's phone video sat in a separately labeled evidence folder, along with his signed witness statement. Bernice Holloway's affidavit, 4 pages, was the last item in the row. Agent Kwan looked at it all for a long moment without speaking. Then he said, "They have no idea how deep this goes." "No," Dr. Elena Marsh said. "Raymond Holt thinks this is a complaint about one incident involving one passenger. He offered to settle it for sensitivity training and an apology letter." James Kwan looked at her. "While you were recording." "While I was recording," she confirmed. The strategy session lasted 2 hours. They went through each piece of evidence in sequence, identifying the specific federal statutes implicated, the chain of custody for each document, the corroboration pathways between the historical complaints and Carmen Reyes's internal memos and the body camera footage. The recorded settlement offer from Raymond Holt was the newest and most legally significant element, an attempt to induce a federal investigator to close an active investigation in exchange for administrative concessions conducted in a formal meeting setting. The Harlow Creek Courier article, timed 4 days before Dr. Elena Marsh's scheduled report transmission, added a second potential obstruction thread. They documented both with methodical care. The phone on the table rang at 4:30. The screen read, "Office of Congressman Walter Gaines." Dr. Elena Marsh answered and put it on speaker. The voice on the line belonged to the congressman's chief of staff, a crisp and efficient woman who introduced herself as Sheila Croft and got to the point within 30 seconds. "Congressman Gaines," she said, "was aware of the Harlow Creek Courier piece. He was monitoring the situation closely. He wanted Dr. Elena Marsh to know that the subcommittee's interest in the outcome of this review had not diminished. He remained committed to ensuring that constituent civil rights concerns received full federal attention." Dr. Elena Marsh thanked her. The call lasted 4 minutes. When it ended, Calvin Osei and Agent Kwan both looked at her. She set the phone back on the table, monitoring the situation closely. Calvin Osei said, "Which means he'll support a serious finding if we produce one," Dr. Elena Marsh said, "and distance himself from it if we don't." She did not say this with bitterness. She said it with the matter-of-fact clarity of someone who has worked in the proximity of political calculation long enough to understand its grammar. Congressman Walter Gaines had triggered this investigation with constituent pressure, and his interest in it was real. But it was also conditional on outcomes, and the phone call was as much a reminder of that conditionality as it was reassurance. She filed it accordingly. By 7 that evening, Dr. Elena Marsh was alone at the desk, with her laptop open to the investigation's formal timeline document. Calvin Osei had gone back to his room. Agent Kwan was 2 floors up, running his own analysis of the obstruction evidence through the OIG's secure system. The city outside the hotel window was doing what cities do at that hour, settling into its evening configuration, lights coming on in windows, the last buses of the rush moving through the streets below. Dr. Elena Marsh looked at the timeline, then at her case notes, then at the article on her phone one more time. The original hearing date was 3 weeks out. She began adjusting it. 2 weeks earlier. Procedurally, it was aggressive. It required her supervisor's authorization, which required a justification memo, which she began writing with the same narrow, precise handwriting she had used on every document in this investigation. She cited the press leak. She cited the recorded obstruction attempt. She cited the risk of further narrative contamination of the public record and the evidentiary importance of proceeding before Raymond Holt's legal team could build a more sophisticated defense architecture around the framing they had already introduced. She finished the memo at 7:42. She reviewed it once. She transmitted it to her supervisor in Washington. At 8:23, the response arrived in her secured inbox. 1 line. Approved. Proceed as revised. Dr. Elena Marsh read it twice. She closed the laptop with a quiet, deliberate click. She looked out the hotel window at Harlow Creek, spreading below her in the evening light. The transit depot visible 3 blocks east, its fluorescent panels still blazing through the windows in the darkening air. 4 days ago, Raymond Holt had leaned across a conference table and offered her a way to make this smaller. Tonight, without raising her voice, without confronting anyone, without doing anything except building the case that the evidence demanded, she had made it larger than he had any idea. She allowed herself a small, precise smile. It lasted about 3 seconds. Then she opened her field notebook to a fresh page and began writing the next morning's task list. The preparation room inside the Harlow Creek Federal Building was a windowless interior office on the 2nd floor, 12 feet by 14, lit by a single panel of overhead fluorescent tubes that turned everything beneath it into something unambiguous and unforgiving. Dr. Elena Marsh had chosen it deliberately from the building coordinator's offered options. She did not want mood lighting. She did not want atmosphere. She wanted clarity, and fluorescent panels at 7 in the morning delivered exactly that. She stood at the head of the conference table in her deep red blazer over a pressed white blouse and black slacks, her federal credential case open on the table in front of her, and she moved through the exhibits one final time with the focused economy of someone who has rehearsed a performance so thoroughly that rehearsal has become something else entirely. Certainty. Calvin Osei sat to her left, green jacket over a white-collared shirt and dark slacks, a secured laptop open in front of him, the body camera footage loaded and time-stamped, its opening frame frozen on the interior of Bus Route 7 in the flat overhead light of the Harlow Creek Central Transit Depot. He had reviewed the footage 11 times in the past 4 days. He watched it now the same way he had watched it the first time, with his jaw tight and his hands very still. Agent James Kwan stood near the door, muscular and precise in his green jacket and dark tactical pants, a secured tablet in his right hand, displaying the chain of custody documentation for every piece of physical evidence the DOT was introducing. He had arrived in Harlow Creek 6 days ago and had not wasted a single hour of them. Dr. Elena Marsh moved through the exhibit list without notes because she no longer needed them. Federal Exhibit A, the body camera footage, 11 minutes and 43 seconds, continuous and unedited, capturing Tyler Bowman's escalating performance with the indifferent completeness of a machine that did not know it was supposed to look away. Federal Exhibit B. The 11 prior complaints filed with the DOT Civil Rights Division over the preceding 22 months, each one cross-referenced with internal transit authority logs, confirming the complaints were received, reviewed by Raymond Holt's office, and closed without action or escalation. Federal Exhibit C. Carmen Reyes's 3 internal memos, authenticated against the Transit Authority's own document management system metadata by Agent Kwan's forensic analysis, each one a clean paper record of a culture that had learned to suppress accountability by making the paperwork disappear. Federal Exhibit D. The body camera footage from the meeting at Transit Authority headquarters. Raymond Holt, leaning forward across the conference table, his navy blue jacket open, his voice warm and reasonable as he offered to make the federal review conclude without escalation, apparently unaware that the laptop bag sitting quietly beside Dr. Elena Marsh's chair had been recording since she walked through the building's front door. Federal Exhibit E. Damon Eccles's phone video, 9 seconds of compressed digital footage capturing Tyler Bowman's pointing finger and the precise moment his voice crossed from supervisory authority into something that federal Title VI enforcement language described as targeted discriminatory conduct. Federal Exhibit F. Bernice Holloway's signed affidavit, 7 pages, notarized, describing in careful chronological detail a pattern of treatment on Harlow Creek transit routes that spanned 4 years and had never once been formally acknowledged by the authority she paid fares to ride. 6 exhibits, $47 million in federal funding, 31 years of Tyler Bowman's unchallenged performance on Route 7, about to encounter the weight of every single thing it had never expected to meet. Dr. Elena Marsh closed the exhibit folder and looked at Calvin Osei. He looked back at her and said nothing, because there was nothing left to say that the evidence had not already said more completely. She picked up her credential case, checked the time, and walked toward the door. The main hearing room on the 3rd floor was large enough to carry its own gravity. Tall windows on the east wall poured the morning's direct clear light across the room in wide, clean columns, and the overhead fluorescent panels supplemented that light until every surface, every face, every document on every table existed in a state of complete and unambiguous visibility. There was nowhere to be vague in a room lit like this. Dr. Elena Marsh had noticed that about federal buildings a long time ago and had never stopped appreciating it. Judge Lorraine Vance was already seated at the elevated bench when Dr. Elena Marsh entered and took her position at the petitioner's table. Judge Vance was a black woman in her 50s, composed in her federal judicial robes with the particular stillness of someone who had spent decades in rooms like this one and had long since stopped being impressed by anything except the quality of evidence. She reviewed a document in front of her, with reading glasses perched at the end of her nose, and did not look up when the doors opened. At the respondent's table on the opposite side of the room, Raymond Holt sat in his navy blue jacket over a pressed orange dress shirt, silver-haired, his expression arranged into something that was almost confidence. Patricia Wren sat beside him in her red blazer over charcoal slacks, a legal pad in front of her, pen in hand, her eyes moving from the judge's bench to the petitioner's table with the alert calculation of an attorney who has spent the last 6 days trying to determine exactly how much the other side knows. She did not yet know the answer to that question. She was about to. In the gallery, Tyler Bowman sat in the 3rd row in his blue jacket over a green-collared shirt, his union representative beside him in a gray suit. He had the posture of a man who had been told by people he trusted that this was a formality, a federal compliance review, routine, procedural, the kind of thing that produced memos and recommendations and ultimately changed nothing. His name was on the case caption as a named individual respondent, which was uncomfortable, but his union representative had told him that this was standard in discrimination reviews and that his 31 years of seniority and his 2019 Employee of the Year award were significant mitigating factors. Tyler Bowman sat in the gallery of the federal hearing room and watched the petitioner's table with the casual attention of a man watching something that did not concern him yet. He had never seen Dr. Elena Marsh outside of the bus. He looked at the woman in the deep red blazer at the petitioner's table the way he would look at any federal bureaucrat, as an abstraction, a function, a role, and he did not recognize her because in his mind the woman he had spoken to on Route 7 11 days ago was not a federal bureaucrat. She was a passenger. Those were separate categories. They had always been separate categories. They were about to become the same one. Judge Vance opened the proceedings, stated the case number and parties, and confirmed the presence of all named respondents. She addressed the DOT's representative and asked if the petitioner was prepared to present the agency's initial evidence submission. Dr. Elena Marsh rose from her chair. She picked up her credential case. She walked to the podium at the front of the room, at a pace that was neither hurried nor theatrical, the pace of someone who had been moving toward this moment for 11 days, across 11 prior complaints, across 4 years of suppressed testimony, and who had no interest in performing urgency she did not feel. She placed her credential case on the podium. She opened it. She looked up at Judge Vance, and then, briefly and without particular emphasis, across the room at the respondents' table. She said, "For the record, my name is Dr. Elena Marsh. I am the Senior Civil Rights Investigator for the U.S. Department of Transportation, Office of Civil Rights, Title VI Compliance Division. I am the lead investigator on this matter and the author of the preliminary findings report submitted to this court on June 14th. She paused for exactly the length of time it took to let that land. I am also the passenger Tyler Bowman addressed on bus Route 7 on June 3rd of this year. The pen in Patricia Wren's hand stopped moving. Raymond Holt's jaw tightened in a single, involuntary motion that he could not have described and would have denied if asked about it. And his eyes moved to Patricia Wren's face with the panicked speed of a man realizing that the foundation of a structure he thought was solid has just shifted beneath him. In the gallery, Tyler Bowman rose slightly from his seat, not standing, not yet, just the first reflexive motion of a body trying to physically reconcile two things that his mind was not yet able to hold simultaneously. The woman on the bus who was a nobody, and the federal investigator at the podium who had just placed her credentials on record. The union representative beside him put a hand briefly on his arm. Tyler Bowman sat back down, but his face was different now. The casual attention was gone. What replaced it was something older and less composed, the particular expression of a man who has spent 31 years operating inside a system that protected him, now watching that system's walls become transparent. Dr. Elena Marsh did not look at him. She turned to the audio-visual operator and nodded. "The department submits Federal Exhibit A," she said. "Body camera footage, June 3rd, 11 minutes and 43 seconds, recorded aboard bus Route 7 of the Harlow Creek Municipal Transit Authority." The large screen on the wall behind her came to life. The interior of the bus appeared. The overhead panels of the depot, the midday sun streaming through the bus windows, the ordinary geometry of a public transit vehicle on an ordinary Tuesday. The footage was clear. It was complete. It was merciless in the way that only accurate records of real events can be merciless, because it did not editorialize, and it did not need to. And then Tyler Bowman's voice filled the federal hearing chamber. "Sit in the back, or get off my bus." The words moved through the room with the full weight of their second hearing. Stripped now of the audience that had nodded along, stripped of the depot's diesel air and the comfort of 31 years of impunity, surrounded instead by fluorescent light and federal jurisdiction, and the quiet, absolute authority of a record that had been waiting 11 days to be played in exactly this room. The footage ran to its end. The screen went still. The room was silent in the particular way that rooms are silent when everyone in them is processing the same irreversible thing. Judge Lorraine Vance looked over her reading glasses at the respondents' table. Her expression did not change. Her voice, when she spoke, was perfectly, judicially calm. "Counsel," she said, "does the respondent wish to request a recess?" The federal hearing room on its second morning looked exactly as it had on the first. Tall windows pouring clean October light across the respondent's table. Overhead fluorescent panels running the full length of the ceiling. Every face rendered in unsparing clarity beneath that double illumination. Judge Lorraine Vance was already seated when Carmen Reyes was called to the stand, and the room settled into the particular silence that precedes testimony that everyone present already suspects will be damaging. Carmen Reyes wore her orange transit uniform top and black pants, a deliberate choice that Dr. Elena Marsh had not suggested but immediately understood. She was sitting inside the institution that had wronged her, dressed in its colors, refusing to pretend she was anything other than what she was, an employee who had watched her workplace bury the truth and had decided, at considerable personal risk, that she was done helping it stay buried. Patricia Wren began the cross-examination with the careful, calibrated aggression of an attorney who knows her position is weak but cannot afford to show it. She questioned the provenance of the memos Carmen Reyes had provided to the federal investigation. She questioned the sequence of events that led Carmen Reyes to approach a federal investigator. She suggested with practiced delicacy that an employee passed over for a scheduling promotion might have personal reasons to characterize internal practices in an unflattering light. Carmen Reyes answered every question in a clear, even voice, her hands flat on the railing of the witness stand, her eyes on the attorney and not on Raymond Holt, who sat at the respondent's table in his navy blue jacket and orange dress shirt, and stared at the surface in front of him with the expression of a man watching the floor dissolve beneath his chair. The memos had dates on them. The memos had routing stamps. The memos had Raymond Holt's own initials in the upper right corner of 2 of the 3 pages, which Patricia Wren had made the strategic error of raising, because Judge Lorraine Vance looked up from her bench with a quiet precision that ended that line of questioning within 30 seconds. Patricia Wren requested adjournment. Judge Lorraine Vance denied it and asked her to continue. Bernice Holloway took the stand that same afternoon, a 67-year-old woman in a blue jacket over a floral blouse, her hands folded in her lap with the careful composure of someone who has had a great deal of practice, presenting herself without offering the world anything it could use against her. She testified for 41 minutes. She did not raise her voice once. She described the particular quality of Tyler Bowman's tone when he addressed her. Not the words specifically, but the register, the contempt wrapped in administrative language, the way it was designed to humiliate without providing anything she could formally object to. She described leaving her house 40 minutes early to avoid his route. She described the way she had trained herself to sit toward the back, even when the front was completely empty, not because she was required to, but because the cost of the confrontation was something she had spent years calculating and deciding she could not keep paying. The room did not move while she spoke. Patricia Wren did not cross-examine her. Raymond Holt's junior attorney attempted 2 questions and stopped after Bernice Holloway answered the second one with a patience so absolute and a specificity so exact that there was simply nothing left to question. Judge Lorraine Vance thanked her, and Bernice Holloway unfolded her hands, stood, and walked back to her seat with the unhurried dignity of a woman who had waited a long time to say true things in a room that was required by law to hear them. Damon Eccles testified on the hearing's 3rd day, green jacket over a dark collared shirt. His phone video entered as Federal Exhibit C and played on the same large screen that had displayed Dr. Elena Marsh's body camera footage the day before. He described Tyler Bowman turning on him when he began recording, the way the route supervisor's voice shifted from performative authority to something quieter and more directly threatening. The way the other passengers who had been nodding along went silent when Tyler Bowman moved toward Damon Eccles with his hand out. Damon Eccles had been 22 years old that afternoon on bus Route 7, a junior at Harlow Creek State studying communications, and he had kept recording for 4 more seconds before stopping because, as he told the hearing room plainly, he had made a calculation about his own physical safety that he wished he had not been forced to make. Federal Exhibit D was Raymond Holt's recorded settlement offer to Dr. Elena Marsh. The conversation from the Transit Authority's own conference room played at full volume in the federal hearing chamber. Raymond Holt's voice filling the high-ceilinged space with the smooth, reasonable cadence of a man explaining to a federal investigator how to make a federal investigation go away quietly. Patricia Wren requested adjournment for the second time when the playback began. Judge Lorraine Vance denied it for the second time without looking up from her notes, and the recording continued to its end. When Judge Lorraine Vance adjourned for deliberation that evening, the corridor outside the hearing room had the stunned, suspended quality of air after a thunderstorm. People standing in small clusters, speaking quietly, the Transit Authority's legal team moving in a tight group toward the elevators without making eye contact with anyone. Tyler Bowman was waiting on the steps of the federal building when Agent James Kwan came through the doors, muscular and composed in his green jacket and dark tactical pants, carrying a formal suspension notice and a Transit Authority credential envelope. Tyler Bowman had spent 3 days sitting in the gallery in his blue jacket over a green-collared shirt, watching 11 years of accumulated institutional protection dissolve piece by piece in fluorescent light. He did not say anything when Agent James Kwan handed him the suspension notice and asked for his Transit Authority ID badge. He unclipped it from his jacket collar and placed it in the envelope with the particular careful slowness of a man doing the one thing that is left to him, which is not to let anyone see what it costs him. 40 feet away on the federal building steps, Damon Eccles, who had been granted media clearance as a witness, raised his phone and took a photograph. It would be on the Harlow Creek Courier's website by 6 o'clock that evening. Raymond Holt's resignation came 72 hours later. The letter cited personal reasons. It arrived at the Transit Authority's Board of Directors via a courier service, not through the authority's own administrative channels, which told Dr. Elena Marsh everything she needed to know about who had arranged for its immediate transmission to the press. Patricia Wren was protecting herself. It was what calculating people did when the calculation changed, and Dr. Elena Marsh noted it without surprise and without particular interest. The DOT Civil Rights Division's formal notice of noncompliance against Harlow Creek Municipal Transit Authority was issued on a Thursday morning, a 7-page document that placed $47 million in annual federal funding under formal 90-day probationary review contingent on the demonstration of structural civil rights reforms. The Transit Authority's Board of Directors convened in emergency session the following Monday and voted unanimously to implement an independent civil rights compliance monitor, a position that had never existed in the authority's 43-year history and whose necessity the board had unanimously resisted, acknowledging for the 11 months prior to that vote. Dr. Elena Marsh was in her hotel room reviewing the Compliance Monitor Framework documentation when her phone rang with a number she recognized. She answered on the second ring. Bernice Holloway's voice was quieter over the phone than it had been in the hearing room, not diminished, quieter in the way that things become when they no longer need to project past resistance to be heard. She said she had ridden the bus that morning. She said she had sat in the front. She said the driver, a young woman Bernice Holloway had not seen on that route before, had said good morning to her and had not said anything else, and that the ride had been 23 minutes long, and that it had been, in her word, ordinary. She said the word ordinary the way other people might say the word extraordinary, with a fullness that contained inside it all the years when ordinary had not been available to her on that particular route. Dr. Elena Marsh did not say very much. She said she was glad. She meant it with a precision that no other word in the English language would have accommodated. After the call ended, she sat for a while with the phone in her hand and the hotel window in front of her, the midday light coming in flat and clear across the desk. The case file was beside her laptop, tabbed and indexed, every exhibit cataloged in the order it had been presented. 11 prior complaints, 12 if you counted hers, which the federal record did prominently. Carmen Reyes's memos, Bernice Holloway's affidavit, Damon Eccles' video, Raymond Holt's voice, recorded without his knowledge, offering to make the truth disappear in exchange for the convenience of everyone except the people who had lived inside it. She had let the evidence speak. She had been trained to do exactly that, and she had done it without deviation from the day she boarded bus Route 7 with a worn laptop bag and a body camera, and the particular kind of patience that is not passive but is the most active and disciplined response available to a person who understands that documented truth, assembled with precision, is the most durable instrument of accountability that exists. Tyler Bowman's formal termination letter was issued 14 days after his suspension, following the expedited disciplinary proceedings the Transit Authority's board authorized under the compliance framework. The letter was 2 paragraphs long. It cited specific documented incidents. It cited federal exhibits A through D by name. It cited 31 years of seniority and found them insufficient to offset the weight of what those exhibits contained. And outside, in the Harlow Creek Central Transit Depot, the overhead fluorescent panels ran the length of the ceiling as they always did, and the morning sky poured through the skylight windows in broad, clear columns of light, and the buses pulled in and out along their routes with the steady, ordinary rhythm of a city moving through its day. Passengers boarded and chose their seats and looked out the windows at the streets going past. The depot smelled of diesel and industrial cleaner and morning air. Everything looked as it had always looked. One particular route supervisor was not there. The buses ran on time. 2 weeks after Tyler Bowman's termination letter was signed, sealed, and delivered, Dr. Elena Marsh walked into the Harlow Creek Central Transit Depot one final time. The overhead fluorescent panels burned the same clean white they always had. The morning's early light was just beginning to pour through the skylight windows in long, pale columns, the way it did every day in this building, indifferent to everything that had happened beneath it. The diesel smell was the same. The sound of buses pulling into their bays was the same. And yet something in the quality of the air was different. Not quieter exactly, but less pressurized, the way a room feels after a window has finally been opened. Dr. Elena Marsh stood on the main platform for a moment and breathed it in. She had a meeting first. Jerome Patton, the Transit Authority's newly appointed interim director, was 38 years old, wore a green-collared shirt under a navy blue jacket, and had been promoted internally from his position as Operations Compliance Coordinator, a title that had, until 3 weeks ago, been largely decorative. He met Dr. Elena Marsh in his office, a room still in the process of being organized, stacks of binders and route maps sharing space with a potted plant someone had placed near the window. Optimistically, he had a copy of the compliance framework Dr. Elena Marsh's office had submitted to the DOT. It was already annotated, careful notes in blue pen filling the margins, questions flagged with small paper tabs, specific timelines circled. He had been working through it before she arrived. She could tell by the coffee ring on the cover. They talked for 40 minutes. Jerome Patton asked precise questions and listened to the answers without performing agreement. He was not naive about what the next 18 months would require. He said so directly. Dr. Elena Marsh appreciated the directness. She told him so. When she left, she shook his hand and meant it. From the transit building she drove to Eastside, to the community recreation center with its wide skylights and folding chairs and floors that caught the morning light and held it. The residents who had testified had organized something small. No ceremony, no speeches, just coffee and a few plates of food on a folding table and the particular warmth generated by people who had gone through something genuinely hard together and arrived, against some odds, at the other side of it. Damon Eccles was there in a green jacket, talking to two other young men, his phone in his pocket for once. Carmen Reyes stood near the window in her transit uniform, orange top and black pants, still employed, still driving her route, no longer alone with what she knew. Several of the original complainants were there, people whose names had lived in Dr. Elena Marsh's case files for months before she ever heard their voices. She spoke to each of them briefly. She accepted coffee. She did not make a speech. Bernice Holloway was seated at a table by the window, her blue jacket buttoned carefully at the collar, her hands folded in her lap, with the composed patience that Dr. Elena Marsh had come to understand was not resignation, but a kind of earned authority. Dr. Elena Marsh sat down across from her, and they talked for a long time about the coffee, which Bernice Holloway said was better than the church hall version, but not by as much as the recreation center believed. About the neighborhood and a bakery on Clement Street that had recently changed ownership, and whether the new owners understood what they had inherited. About small, sturdy, ordinary things. The case did not come up. It did not need to. It was present the way the light through the window was present. Not announced, just there, making everything a little clearer. The final accounting of what the investigation had produced was not dramatic in its delivery. Tyler Bowman's termination was upheld through the union arbitration process. 31 years of seniority had not been enough to outweigh 11 minutes of documented federal evidence, plus 11 prior complaints, plus Carmen Reyes's memos, plus Raymond Holt's recorded obstruction offer, plus everything else Dr. Elena Marsh had assembled, piece by careful piece, in the weeks between a Tuesday afternoon bus ride and a federal hearing room. Raymond Holt had been referred to the DOT Inspector General for potential obstruction proceedings. Patricia Wren's firm had quietly withdrawn from representing the Transit Authority, a decision the paperwork noted without elaboration. Harlow Creek Transit retained its $47 million in federal funding on the condition of implementing all 12 mandated reforms within 18 months, with quarterly compliance reporting to Dr. Elena Marsh's division in Washington. Congressman Walter Gaines's office issued a press statement praising the thoroughness of the investigation and the DOT's commitment to civil rights enforcement. Dr. Elena Marsh read it on her phone while standing in the recreation center parking lot, recognized it accurately for what it was, and set her phone in her bag. She drove back to the depot. She parked. She retrieved her laptop bag from the passenger seat, the worn strap over her shoulder, the federal credential case in the outer pocket where it always was. She walked to the boarding platform for bus Route 7. The morning sun was fully up now, flooding the bus windows with clean, direct light. She stepped on. She walked to the front. She sat down. The city began to move past the window. The streets, the storefronts, the ordinary and specific architecture of daily life, in a place that was, by some small but permanent and measurable degree, more equitable than it had been on a Tuesday afternoon several weeks ago, when a body camera had begun to record. Not a different city, the same city, with one thing changed. That was how it worked. That was what the work was for. At the next stop, several passengers boarded. The last of them was an elderly woman in a blue jacket. She stepped onto the bus, looked toward the front, and sat down in the row directly across from Dr. Elena Marsh. Neither woman spoke. Neither woman had to. The bus pulled away from the curb, out into the full morning light, the city ahead, the road open, and no one, not one single person on that bus, telling either of them otherwise. You just heard a story that history tried to overlook. If it stayed with you, take a second to stand with it. Subscribe, share, and help us keep telling the stories that deserve light, not silence.